why you can't let one person's advice ever discourage you from going down a path that you feel is something that you should be pursuing. There's still opportunities in every asset class, but as things progress over time, those windows close. But if you really are committed to something and that's what you want to do, there's going to be opportunity there.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hennche. Welcome to another episode of The Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Hennche. Today, I'm thrilled to have Andy Freeman, the owner of mobile home parks and the founder of Enjoy Capital Group and Enjoy Communities, for an insightful conversation. Andy's not only a real estate investor, but also an accomplished sales professional. Andy's impressive portfolio boasts a total value of $30 million, spanning across 18 communities and one coming end of this week, with over 1,000 lots. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So maybe let's start. Why mobile home parks?
Yeah, so mobile home parks came to me in a roundabout way. I had about 5-10 years ago, probably 10 years at this point, I had a friend of a friend who was he was more well off than everyone. He was the guy he had a plane, he had all this, and that's not necessarily what I was after, but everyone said he owned mobile home parks, right? And at the time I wasn't in real estate. I didn't think, I didn't look too much into it. He owned mobile home parks and that's how he made his money. And, no one else around him was doing it. It was just him. But as I did sales and decided real estate was the path I wanted to go down, I said, hey, let me try to figure out what those mobile home parks are that he was doing, right? So I just kind of got curious and I dug more into it, listened to podcasts, and I said, hey, I'm not going to do as well as he did. He got into it in the 80s and, the cat's out of the bag more than it was then. But, I just did some more research. I feel like it's still a kind of not fully understood or not, fully saturated asset class. And I just decided I wanted to diversify into that. And I like the fundamentals of it too, which we can explain. But, in a quick summary, that's how I stumbled upon that asset class.
Did you have actually access to him kind of as a mentor figure, or it was just that you saw what he was doing and it kind of intrigued you and that kind of led you to self-educate yourself?
Yeah, more self-education. I mean, I reached out to him once, I was kind of ready and I said, hey, are you still buying? He's like, no, basically saying I'm too late to the space. And because even to this day, he's only buying maybe 1 or 2 parks a year. He made most of his large purchases decades ago, right? He's just held them long term. It's harder. He was, especially when you're buying back then when properties are a lot less than they are now. He can't get comfortable with today's pricing. So he basically told me I'm too late to the game. So I didn't let that discourage me, but I didn't keep asking him for tips at that point. So I said, I'll figure this out on my own.
And that's so funny, he says you're too late to the game, and here you are, having 1.5 dozen mobile home parks under management. I think this is something where when we choose advice, we really have to see how biased someone is, and as you said, there's somebody who comes in at a certain level of pricing and then time goes by. It's like my grandpa who used to tell me how, I don't know, maybe how cheap something was when he was a child. I'm like, well, that's a different economy altogether. It's like a different market reality.
Exactly. That's the same concept in here. And then some people are also protective of how, people are willing to share and some people aren't. They're like, well, I don't want all these people coming in and doing what I'm doing. So they're protective of, they don't want other people stumbling upon what they've discovered. So there's a lot of that goes into there. That's why you can't let one person's advice ever, discourage you from going down, a path that you feel is something that you should be pursuing.
How do you feel about 10 people's advice?
If 10 people, I'd still want to have to learn from my own. If I decided that made sense, then I'd also learn that it's more competitive and, you have to try harder. But the same thing is now, I would still, at this point, I would say, hey, you're better off buying. I mean, with real estate, the best time to buy is always 5-10 years ago, right? But then the second best time to buy is right now. So in 5 years, I'm going to, it's the same thing that just repeats itself. So yes, 10 years ago was a better time to buy, 20 years even better than that, but right now is still a good time to buy, right? There's still opportunities in every asset class, but as things progress over time, those windows close, but if you really are committed to something and that's what you want to do, there's going to be opportunity there.
So maybe for us multifamily driven investors, why would you maybe make our watery with mouth watery this way with mobile home parks? Like what is in it right now still that you would say makes it an attractive case?
Yeah, so mobile home parks still, the industry as a whole is still not as consolidated as apartments or stores. There's just so many more of these parks that are still owned by the original mom and pops who built them, or they're the same families that built them. So you can still buy mobile home parks from the original builders. A lot of them are still market lot rents way under market because the mom and pops, they run their parks and a lot of them treat them nice and they make them look nice, but they're not running them like a business, right? They're not really focused on reviewing their P&L every quarter and sending out reports to invest. They're running them. They have a relationship with the tenants, and that relationship with the tenants also prevents them from necessarily increasing the rents over time. And over time, these lot rents have just fallen behind with inflation. The lot rents in America, they say, should be average of 500 to 600, and we're sitting at like 300 average lot rents across the board. There's some higher states and lower, but also from a operation standpoint, right? Mobile home parks, the model we focus, we're owning just the land. The residents own their own homes and they rent their parking space from us, right? So it's a lot less labor intensive than, say, apartments, where there's a much higher turnover. In apartments, I think the tenants are turning over every year. Mobile home parks average is 10 to 12 years. A tenant stays there. So the model, I feel, is easier for scale. I feel like even though there's many less mobile home parks than, say, apartments, self-storage facilities, which makes it a little bit harder to get into, there's just less people in this asset class still to this day. And that's why, I had started in trying to find apartment deals, and it's very competitive. So I don't want to say I took the easier route, but I just found there's just a little more room to run in this asset class. And still to this day, even though there's more and more podcasts talking about it.
Yeah. And I literally just made the case for that statement before we went live.
Yeah, you're right.
So you said that you only provide the lot basically, and people own their own mobile home, which probably leads to a different sense of ownership and pride. And I assume that if somebody rents the mobile home, similar maybe to an apartment, they might take less care of it, and they might be more likely to moving, because I think moving the entire mobile home for them might be a different kind of expense altogether than it might be to simply carry out a couple boxes and move somewhere else.
Yeah, so you nailed it. You nailed it on the head right there. So not to say the renters are not going to take pride in ownership, but a lot of these, it's their home. The tenant-owned model, which is the tenants that own their own homes. My personal opinion is there's a lot higher level of pride of ownership with them. They stay longer. They keep their lawns nice. They keep their homes. They add the nice decorations. Over time, they build and improve on their property, whereas they don't want to go anywhere else, right? So whereas the renters and mobile homes are not as conducive to being rental properties. They're not built as they're well built, but they're not the same construction as a stick built house. If you have a harder tenant in there, they're going to wear the house out, and sometimes they wear the house out and they say, "Hey, I'm done now," and then it's back on the landlord or the park owner to have to take that home back, remodel it, and you basically just used all the profits you made over the last couple of years to go back into remodeling the home. So that's why that model I don't feel works, and why we don't adopt that model. So you nailed it. There's a higher pride of ownership with the tenant-owned home model. And across the board, that's my opinion. Some people argue against that, but that's my opinion. So that's what we look to do, is just not own any of the homes, let them own the homes, take their pride of ownership, and then kind of work together to keep a great community.
So what would you say makes a good community? Like what do you try to instill as a management company that makes a great community?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing that homes themselves, they lack a lot of storage, and mobile homes parks, they quickly fill up with clutter if you let that get out of control. people, they maybe have a shed, but they have all kinds of bikes around the shed. There's toys, there's garbage cans and whatnot. So we really try to hammer home having clean yards, all the debris picked up. So when we first take over a property, I mean, we bring in roll-off dumpster, one or two, however many we need. We have a trash cleanup day, and because a lot of times the old owners never even gave them a chance, right? They can only throw so much away. We say, hey, we're going to enforce these rules, but we're going to give you a chance. We'll pay for it. You bring your stuff, all your junk in your house, junk in your yard. Let's clean it up, because that's kind of when you go into a mobile home park and there's just clutter everywhere. That's when you start having negative thoughts about them. But if you walk in, go into a mobile home park, the yards are clean, and also the park. I didn't mention the park has to keep the lawn mowed well. So you have to have a good contract with someone to do the mowing and the maintenance. Keep those lawns. You want the grass short and you want the yards clean, and that goes a long way. Even if there's older homes in the park, well manicured yards and free of clutter is kind of one of the best ways that doesn't cost too much to really overhaul the whole appearance.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you want to own a self-storage unit right next to it so that people can put their stuff in a self-storage unit.
Yeah, some parks do have that, actually. It's not too uncommon to see that, but we also have some parks where everyone's required to have a shed, and then they just have a shed towards the back of the house. They can fit a good amount of stuff in there. And we don't care how messy their shed is, as long as the stuff's off the yard. So we don't have too big a problem, because in your rules you can have it where if there's excess clutter in the yard, you can you give them a warning. If they don't clean it up, you can clean it up for them, but you're going to bill them and charge them an hourly rate plus whatever. And a lot of times they don't want you to do that, so they'll usually comply. So for the most part, the parks that we have are all pretty clean. You always get that one or two people that you really got to stay on. They'll clean it up, but then they'll revert right back to their old ways. But yeah, it's something that if you're not managing it hands on, and you're only visiting your properties once every couple of years, or you're not keeping eyes on your property, it can quickly go back to the way that you work so hard to change.
Yeah. So from my understanding, towns, cities are not very keen on having new mobile home comes up anywhere. So they're kind of kept right where they are in.
Yeah, I would say, you hear some people developing them, but there's so many more that are destroyed that you don't hear about or redeveloped. So mobile home parks, and there's a reason. It's not just for the stigma involved, and they think it's bad quality tenant base, but the property taxes generated from the residents are not that high. The individual mobile home park owners pay very low property tax. A lot of times that land is pretty expansive. It's not as dense as when they can go put in townhomes or condos, and they can generate a lot more tax dollars per acre. So it's not just they don't like mobile home parks, but they also it's the revenue produced by them as well. So you're not going to find too many in higher ticket markets. You're not going to find many municipalities that are for mobile home parks being built, even if they try to say, hey, we're all for affordable housing. They still don't want it in their backyard. First, is kind of what we see. So it is that is one of the barriers to entry, and that's one of the things that I like about it. They're not building more, right? So every time a park goes away, it's unfortunate, but it also sort of adds value to the product you have. They're not creating more. There's 1 to 2, anywhere between 2 to probably 10 per year, but then I would say there's probably 20 to 30 per year that are destroyed. So it's definitely a downward trend versus upward.
So basically, you have no incentive to sell them once you own them. You want to keep them and hold them for long, and then you will be the guy.
That's the problem. Yeah, you could see apartments have, and this is not knocking on the apartment model, but a lot of these apartment guys are buying with a 3-year hold. They want to buy. They go in, they all paint the walls gray. They hike the rents up. They remodel every unit, and then they sell it, right? And they generate a nice IRR on paper, and they do it again. Whereas mobile home park owners, the problem is most, someone trying to buy more, a lot of these sellers are like, why am I going to sell this? It generates great income. And a lot of the families, they want to leave it to their families, their children. They don't, and a lot of the people we're trying to buy off don't have any debt on them. They own them free and clear. And without the debt, I mean, they could be making 25 to 75,000 a month in their pocket, and they have them on cruise control. So there's just not as much motivation to sell. And as owners ourselves, we don't really have any urgency to sell as well. I mean, as time goes on, the value is going to continue to go up. You put more and more time and energy into the parks, you improve them. So you're basically, I mean, you're creating kind of a legacy asset assuming you buy on a front end a property that you enjoy owning, right? You can buy, if you buy something that wasn't what you thought it was, then maybe you're looking to exit. But for the most part, luckily we haven't done that yet.
Yeah. So then who sells? Like, who do you buy from? Who's actually interested in selling? Is that somebody who's at the end of their career in a sense, and they feel like they want to put the money somewhere else, or they don't have children, they can't pass it on, like, because it sounds very much like an asset that you want to keep.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I did this graph. I don't think I ever made the LinkedIn post, but I was going to do like the average age of the last 4 or 5 people we bought mobile home parks off. The park we're closing on Friday. I mean, the sellers are in their 80s. They're still gonna 1031 into a Delaware statutory trust, so they're going to put it into another investment vehicle, but they want to be totally hands off. Unfortunately, the wife's having some health issues, and it just eventually there comes a time if they have no one else to leave it to. They're going to eventually sell it, even though they don't necessarily want to, but it's a life circumstance that typically makes them do that, right? And then
Yeah.
last couple of parks have all been sellers in their 70s, and the time has just come. So the thing is, they don't ever like refinance and pull money out of them. They just sit with these valuable assets, and a lot of times, sadly, they work their whole life to build them, and we've seen them owners have properties that are $5 to $10 million free and clear, and then they pass away before they're ever able to sell them. And then if they do go to their children, the children want no part of it, then that asset just gets run into the ground. And it's kind of sad to see that. It's almost like they need a little more business guidance as far as, hey, you can keep this property, you can pull some money out of it. You have to make a loan payment, which they're not used to, but typically they don't do that. So to answer your question, yeah, those are the sellers that we're buying from. It's not necessarily they're trying to turn a profit, because that's not what they're
Yeah.
after, right? So it's they have to sell.
Yeah, it's they're at a stage in their life where they have different priorities. So
Correct.
have you ever mapped it out? I mean, it sounds like what you really want to do is map out all of those mobile home parks and get to know the owners and see at which part of the arc of life they are at.
Well, yeah, I have. That's what I've done. I mean, that's when I first started, like again, 5, 6 years ago. I mean, all I was doing was building a database, and if it was in an LLC name, I didn't really even put it on my list. I mean, looking back, I probably should have, because there's some, but most of these sellers don't even have the parks in an LLC. It's just in their personal name, right? So you see a park that's in a personal name, that's not typically going to be a sophisticated operator, right? Because the most sophisticated operators are using LLCs for various reasons, right? So, um, yeah, and all these deals, you don't just call and they're ready to sell. I mean, these can be 2, 3, 4 years of follow up, right? Because you're just trying to catch them at the right
Yeah.
time. So a lot. I mean, I can't even tell you how many hours I've spent on the phone. I mean, they're friendly, very friendly sellers. I mean, I've spent hours on the phone with people that aren't even ready to sell, right? Or don't even, they say, no, I'm not willing to sell. They don't just hang up. They still will tell you, their story for an hour and talk. So, because a lot of times the family member doesn't even necessarily, their family's not interested in what they're doing. So they have someone to actually listen to them. And it's over time, you're building that bond with them. And that's what it takes. Because they're not, like I said earlier, they're not necessarily after top dollar. They want, it's their pride and joy. They want to go someone that's going to treat it right and kind of carry on their legacy. So it's definitely a relationship driven approach, right? Versus off
Yeah.
market, which we also talk about, but we don't really haven't really bought too much on market. On market, it's just a bidding war, right? You got a sophisticated seller, they're going to take highest dollar amount there, whoever's putting the most non-refundable earnest money down. And it's a whole different ball game. And that's exactly what I didn't want to get involved in. So
I can relate to not wanting top dollars, but you just want to pass it on to somebody who you can relate to. And so we've dissolved my dad's business, and there've been a lot of equipment things that he held highly. And every time a buyer came that was excited about buying it because he wanted to do something with it, that made me feel so much better as a seller.
yeah,
and and it was so cool because there was like this, there's people who clearly bought parts of equipment for a business case, and that just, I don't know, it was okay, but it didn't feel the same way. And then
yeah,
you had people who were like, wow, I'm gonna do this and this with it. And I'm like, that really got me excited as the seller. And then to what you said, you almost feel like you want to give it at a discount if they, not necessarily, but you're like, man, this person actually appreciates it. And at least in maybe that's not as relevant for the mobile home park, but there were pieces of equipment where I felt like if they could get a second life, it would make me very happy. Like instead of just going to maybe scrap metal yard or something.
Yeah, that's just no, that's the same. That's a great comparison. It's the same thing. I mean, if you told them, hey, I'm buying your park, I'm paying you more, but I'm going to redevelop it and displace all these residents, they're not
Oh
going to
yeah,
go for that. Even if you're
yeah,
paying them double, maybe double the amount, but most of them will not go for that. I mean, they hate the thought of that, right? So it's like if you go in there and trying to flex how big your company is, this and that, all these plans, they're not gonna like that, right? They want, like, just like you mentioned, someone that's going to carry on what they've built. And they want to know that's in good hands.
yeah. I can totally relate to that, and that's and it's in a way you're Andy, you're in a very interesting niche that you enjoy for yourself. You're like, I don't want to go into that sophisticated bidding war. I'm more sophisticated than the guys I'm dealing with, but I'm meeting them on the same eye level. And I'm going in there and I'm willing to do the work that you can't relate to. Like there's so many calls, so many hours on phone that you cannot really say that led to anything. But then there are those one-offs which will lead like this weekend to closing.
Correct. Yeah, and I'll go drive. I'll drive. I'm in Minneapolis currently. I've been around the Midwest, but I mean, I'll go drive 5, 6 hours to meet them in person, because a lot of them want to meet you in person, right? They want to drive you
Yeah.
around their park, talk about the history. I mean, I've sat in the car for a lot of hours too, driving through the parks, listening to the stories about this lot and that lot, and they love to share their story. But yeah, it's also, I enjoy the sellers and that part, talking with the sellers. I enjoy hearing their story. I also, from the mobile home park space, I like the residents in the parks we have. I mean, all these residents have their own story and such. It's I like the asset class, and it's just each stage is a fun stage. Obviously, if the sellers were great, but then obviously you're dealing with a tenant base that's challenging and such, then maybe that's not as, because the management side of the rental property is not as fun, right? But when you have, like we talked about earlier, you have communities with a strong pride of ownership, the tenants own their homes. You typically have kind of a better, just a better overall park. It's a lot more enjoyable to operate. And so kind of why our company is called Enjoy Communities. I mean, it's all based on the premise. I was after, I did with previous partners, we bought some communities that were a little tougher to run. And I missed some Valentine's Day being at the mobile home park, fixing repairs. I had to deal with a lot of tenant issues and going to the park every day. So I was strategically after buying communities that I was going to want to enjoy operating, and enjoy all processes of the operations, the management, et cetera. So we've been a little more picky with acquisitions with that premise in mind.
Yeah. I think that's intelligent, to keep those things in mind when you make acquisitions or, build any relationship. Do you feel like when you communicate with the owners, you can on a regular basis build very genuine relationships based on that you're not trying to redevelop it, based on that you're not trying to come in big, but you're meeting them eye to eye, and you're like, hey, I actually enjoy this. Like I like doing this, and I'm not looking for a quick buck, but I'm here to make money.
Yeah, I mean, that goes a long way. I mean, especially it's the fact I can say, hey, we're not a big company. We're not a giant company. Like, I'm who you're talking to. We're not, I'm not a representative of some huge larger corporation where you're never going to talk to the end buyer or something like that. It's just, it makes them more comfortable. The fact that we, especially once you own another property in the area, it also makes the talks easier. We say, hey, we've bought this park, we've done X, Y, and Z with the park. Tenants are happy, and you kind of just build that relationship. That goes a longer way than just they don't, and also they don't really like out of state. So I've found that once I've moved from California, I'm from California originally, but I've been in the Midwest for 4 to 5 years. When I can tell them I'm from the Midwest, I live in the Midwest. It goes a lot further than they don't like New York, they don't like New York and California buyers really coming in. So I try to just not. I have a California number still, but I just try to hint, hey, my address is Missouri or Minnesota or where I'm at. So
Yeah.
that's a big kind of just being one of the common folk is what they want. They're never going to be impressed by how many lots you have, how big your company is. That's the worst approach. And you don't ever want to lead with any kind of pressure tactics, because it's the wrong thing in this asset class for that type of seller. They've owned the property 30 years. They have no debt. trying to get them to hard close them on selling next week is not going to work, right? They can go another 10 years without selling. So you got to have the right strategy in place.
Yeah. I can relate to that sentiment, where people come from those cities and they come to small places and then they act big, and uh,
Yeah.
people in those towns, it's just an allergic reaction for them.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes. Yeah.
get out of here.
No one wants to hear that. Yeah. And that's why it gives a lot of people from that same area a bad name, right? They're not maybe all bad, but the ones trying to use that as like, oh, I'm so cool from Orange County, California, right? Like, no, like they don't care. A lot of people don't even like California outside of California. So that's not the right approach.
There's one of the real estate investors in Texas that we sometimes speak to. He once went to New York and he asked to some institution, or he was talking to some institutional investors, and within like 5 minutes or so, the Texas guy was like, "We're not gonna make any deals, huh?" And the New York was like, "Nope." And that was it. It was just like this
Yeah. Yeah.
super institutional guy and this guy from Texas,
Yeah.
and they're like, "This is
Yeah.
not vibing," and he flew back, and he still made it in his own way, in Texas, in the Texas way. He made it pretty big, like,
Yeah.
but it was just so funny the way he shared that story, because they immediately knew that it's like two different worlds that maybe
Yeah.
shouldn't mingle.
They shouldn't mingle. Yeah. That's not going to work.
But I think that's a good point to transition. How do you envision your life around your investments? Like, we all invest for freedom, we all invest to enable our families. But what brought you initially to invest at all?
Yeah. I guess that's a good question to bring up. Yeah. So when I was in my sales job, I worked for Toyota. I was doing car sales, which I was making pretty good money doing that, which, before I got into it, I didn't know sales had that type of ceiling. But anyway, I was basically working. I mean, I was working myself like crazy. And that's the kind of one industry where if you're not there, like we have no days off, paid days off, right? So if you're not there selling cars, you're not making any money. And so while I was making great money, I kept looking at it like, hey, I'm eventually going to be some age. I can't do this. I don't want to be doing this. If I stop, I have nothing, nothing coming in. So it's where I came, I decided I need to start figuring out a way to take some of this money I'm making and then, generate, when they say passive income or other income sources. So, which led me to real estate and ultimately mobile home parks. Because my goal was making good money at the car sales job, but I knew that it wasn't a sustainable lifestyle forever. And so trading time for dollars versus real estate, my understanding was you own some real estate, you have some kind of passive income coming in. It's arguable not whether it's passive as they say, right? On the, you hear all the times passive income, passive income. It's more passive than working a car sales job, right? So that's kind of how the transition I made it. So my goal now is I enjoy working, right? But I could take off 2 to 3 days if my mother came to town, I could show her around, and business would still continue, right? But whereas when I was at the car job, I take off 2 to 3. I won a trip to, I think, Hawaii or Cancun. I went on one trip, but most of the trips I won, I said, I can't afford to take 4 days off work. I don't want to lose the money I'd be making while being at work. So looking back, that was a stupid way to think, but that's kind of a lot of the situation a lot of people find themselves in. They're making good money in their day job, but they have really no fallback. They could lose their job or something could happen, and you maybe get unemployment for a little while, but you have really no backup source of funds. So that was the strategic play to go into real estate. And in doing that, also trying to kind of reverse lifestyle creep, cut down on expenses. Because going into real estate, my goal was never to make more than I was making at the car dealership right out of the way. I knew that would take time, but it was basically to cover my basic needs. So part of that was got to also reduce my basic needs. So that's kind of a shift that you have to go when you're going from making higher dollars, you're also spending more. You got to kind of reverse both. So hopefully that answers the question. It kind of got long-winded, but I mean, I like talking about it because it's definitely a lot of strategy involved, right? You can't just go buy real estate and then obviously all of a sudden change your whole life. You have to be really strategic with it.
Yeah, and I think what you pointed to, there is a transition phase, where you cannot expect to have like a multiple six-figure, maybe commission-based income suddenly churning out, and it doesn't even matter whether you invest in apartments or in mobile homes or in any real estate. And time plays a major factor into when you will get that lifestyle. And it's, you don't get to eat the fruit the day you plant the seed.
No, no, and a lot of people struggle with that, especially in today's society. It's instant gratification, right? So real estate it's definitely not a get rich quick game. It's a get rich quicker than traditional putting money into a 401k, working a day job. But the first couple of years are tough, man. That's kind of what I try to tell people. Like, you got all these things on paper, like these properties, you're not going to make much cash flow in the first few years. I mean, you have to really be in it for the long game. You have to really enjoy doing it, or else you're gonna burn yourself out or get discouraged. So the transition is hard, and if you have significant others or family members involved as well, it's tough. So you have to have a game plan in place, and I think the best part of that is just being conscientious of what you're spending, and that's kind of the key, is to get those expenses down first, right? Because if you're spending $10,000-$15,000 on basic needs a month, that's going to be tough to transition to real estate. Because I don't know any real estate that can spit off that type of money, right out of the gate, without, unless you're putting significant amount into it, a few million. So
Yeah.
don't let lifestyle creep get a hold of you where you have $2,000 or $3,000 in car payments, you got a $3,000 or $4,000 mortgage, because then it's going to make your transition to real estate even tougher. And I don't even know if it's possible at that point.
Yeah. And I think lifestyle creep in general, like I've met over the last couple of years so many people who had really, really nice salaries and had like no assets whatsoever, and they were perfectly comfortable buying $300-$400 shoes and $1,000 suits and flying business class and stuff. And I'm like, okay, how long can you sustain that when we close the faucet, the money faucet,
Yeah. No, I mean, I mean, looking back, I have coworkers, old former coworkers, during kind of the car industry kind of had a boom in the last few years with their shortages, and a lot of cars were selling over MSRP. I mean, I had coworkers literally making $1 million. And instead of, oh, hey, I got $1 million now, they were making good money before when I was there, but now, really making a lot. And instead of, okay, let me buy some real estate, they're doing $200,000 kitchen remodels. They're buying an RV. They're buying a second car, and they have no real estate or depreciation to offset taxes. So a huge chunk's going to taxes. And then
Yeah.
you bought an RV, you bought this and that, and all of a sudden that's all gone, right? That's money that could change your whole life. But if you just see it as more money to spend, you're almost putting yourself in a worse hole, right? Because you already have $10,000 mortgage before you even So it's the things I've seen, because car industry professionals are not known for being the most smart with their money. It kind of money in, money out. And I was an accountant before I did it for a decade before going to car sales, right? That's what I went to school for, to have a degree. So I have, a little bit different, I didn't hop into car sales right out of high school. And I'm not knocking on it. It's a great industry. I'm very thankful for it. But I was saying, basically what I'm getting at is I was surrounded by a lot of people who weren't very smart with their money. So if you're not smart with your money, you're basically trapped to a job. And that's kind of what I did. And I never wanted to be necessarily trapped to a job, which is not a great way to live.
Let me just touch up on something. You said there's individuals selling cars who make over $1 million in commission a year.
Yeah, I mean, not to brag, but I mean, I had years mid 300,000 selling cars. So I mean, I made over $1 million in 5 years selling Toyotas, which is
Oh,
crazy. But I also didn't know it would last forever. So I saved almost every penny. I only spent a little bit of that money, and then I took that money and put that
yeah,
into real estate.
I didn't know the commission on cars. Like, how many cars a day do you have to sell to get to these numbers?
I mean, the gentleman I'm referring to is selling over 100 a month. My highest month I was selling
Oh,
58 cars, so 58, and that would average, but I was there 7 days a week doing this. So
yeah,
you have to be in a high volume. I was in Southern California, high volume dealership, one of the top dealerships in the country. So there's a big discrepancy between top and bottom in that industry.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
was top 10 in the country in one year, and the guy I'm talking about is number one out of 18,000 sales employees. So it's not the norm, but
yeah,
just happened to stem from our dealership.
yeah. And that's
It's crazy,
you're
right? It's crazy. It's yeah.
but for each each person that makes that kind of commission, there is like another 5,000 that don't almost.
Correct. Yeah. No, there's literally 18,000 Toyota salesmen, right? And so
yeah.
so that's a few out of that number. But that's also like with anything, if you're willing to put the time, energy, and work in. Like I'm not even a salesperson by trade, but I learned how to do it, and I devoted all my time and energy to doing it. And that's kind of what also transitioned into real estate. I spent all my time trying to find off market deals, this and that. Because there was about a year where I just spent building the database, building this up so that I'd have the ammunition to meet sellers and build this database and
Yeah.
find these leads. So it's a lot of unpaid. A lot of unpaid.
A lot of
No, I'm saying
unpaid learning and time.
yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of unpaid learning. Yeah, a lot of unpaid learning where it's not, people always talk about now. Everyone thinks someone's an overnight success, right? But they don't see the. I spent hours. My fiance was writing handwritten letters, and before I realized I could just copy them on a high quality printer. I mean, she was thousands of handwritten letters to owners because that's what they react better to. So until we ever got any kind of momentum. So I mean, it's a lot of not delayed. It's a lot of delayed gratification.
Yeah. And I think, in a way, I think this instant everything is really, it's not making life more fulfilling for people. And I feel like if you're able to delay your gratification just by a decade, you're probably part of that top 10 salesman from Toyota by default, because other people are just they want it so quickly. And there's actually a funny thing that I haven't, maybe you can help me resolve, maybe probably you can't, because it's just, I went into a car dealership. It's almost 8 years ago now. And there's a guy who almost he literally talked me out of buying the car in the way that he seemed so scammy that I was like, I wanted to buy that car that day. I walked in there having the intention to buy a car, and the way he spoke to me, by the time he was done, I was like, okay, I'm done. I cannot buy a car from you. And I walked back out, and I was like, how did this happen? I literally wanted to buy the car, and I walked out, and we got a different car somewhere else.
I can totally answer that because it's so old school the way they were trained. I didn't say this earlier, but I was internet sales. So like I worked on the computer, I sent emails, I got leads. I wasn't sitting out front, all the retail guys that are kind of like the sharks that people don't necessarily, there's a kind of a big difference. Yeah, you had a retail guy that was probably old school, and back in the day, they just did a lot more kind of bully tactics. They're not from the times where they could leave Yelp reviews. And, I've heard stories where salesmen would take the person's trade-in keys, throw them on the roof and say, hey, you got to trade in the car. I mean, you're here, you're buying the car. So it's just different times, different places. And yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. People have such a bad connotation of used car salesman or salesman that, it made my job. I never put any type of pressure on people. Right. So I gave them the info they wanted, give them answer their questions, and there was no pressure tactics, because that's when people get turned off with things. And that's kind of the same approach I took to talking with these sellers. You ask a couple of questions, let them talk, right? Versus, I'm sure the guy you encountered talked your ear off, told you 1,000 reasons why you already wanted to buy the car. So if he would have just asked you a few questions, he would have been able to figure out, hey, you're a buyer, right? But he probably tried to talk all this stuff that you didn't even want to hear and just rub you the wrong way. And there's plenty of those out there.
Yeah, he should have just asked me what color, and and made me feel like he gave me a good price point, and we would have been done,
Yeah, no, it's commonplace in that industry.
When it came to the price, and then it felt like the conversation was so scammy. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, I want to buy a car. Just give me a price point where we're both comfortable, and I'm ready to do this. And he's like, yeah. And then he brought in another person. And
the closer. Yeah, I was gonna ask if he brought in the closer.
Yeah, okay. Well, both.
Yeah, so the closer is even worse. So that, yeah, I didn't have a closer like that, and that's just so old school. It's pressure tactics. Like, you're there, they keep you there 3-4 hours when it should take. I mean, I would get people in and out in an hour. That was my goal, right? Because I try to do everything up front, because I know people don't want to be in the dealership, right? Like, no one wants to go spend a lot of time in the dealership. They want to buy their car and get out of there. And then the way you're talking about it, they trap you in the dealership all day, and they wear you down. And that's why. So, I mean, your story is not the only story like that.
So you're basically, if I go online and I'm looking to buy a car, and then I'm dealing with you. Or that's what you used to do.
Correct. Yeah. So just send it online sales, right? So you, and also what I did, the leads come in, or like if you're working until 9, the leads stop at 9, right? And then they start, and overnight they go like a round robin. They're free to take, right? So I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. I take all the leads, send emails, and then I would, I'd increase my sales just by, no one else was waking up to take leads, even though they were sitting there, right? So I learned the game a little bit, but I would just answer the question, or our boss, or my boss would just say, just answer the damn question, because part of people never answer the question. They just say, oh, well, this and that. Like, just answer the person's question, send them the info they need, and then just, follow up. And a lot of times you don't have to pester someone. So it's just, it's same with mobile home parks, just consistent follow up, being there at the right time, but making someone comfortable. Like, I'm not selling them anything. I'm asking to buy their park, but it's a similar approach, right? You just got to make someone comfortable with you, and not show pressure. No one wants to be pressured. So it's just kind of having that ability to understand what someone else, I guess, basic way to, see what someone's looking for, and what they would like. You don't want someone else to pressure you, so why are you pressuring someone else? Is how I look at it.
I agree 100%. To me, there's nothing as uncomfortable if a salesperson is trying to pressure me. And actually, the same is true for investments. One thing that I learned, there are a couple of people that are close to me that I initially talked into investments, and then I figured that's the dumbest thing I could do. Like, this is the easiest way to burn a relationship, and it's just like, all you have to do is present it. And I think in a similar way, like, actually, this is also why, for example, this entire Grant Cardone, what he's doing, like, I've spoken to a couple of his sales rep, and they really repel me. Like, the way how they're trying to hard sell you all the time and upsell you left, right, center. And I'm like, I don't even care if you take care of your families, but it just feels eternally wrong. Like,
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people doing that, but the problem is, in the industry they're in, you kind of have to be like that to succeed, right? So you're in an industry where you have to be, because it's like in brokerage and stuff. The people that follow up the most get the listings, and it's that industry. There's industries where you have to be like that. So it's, as a consumer, I mean, I nothing I can. There's stuff just like you. If I wanted to buy it, I knew I wanted to buy it. But if someone pressures me, or tries to back me into a corner, I'm done. I'm out, right? Like, I'm never going to be pressure on me, and pressure on you doesn't work to, like, okay, I'll buy. I'm done. I'm going to go back, rethink it. Maybe I'll go somewhere else, or maybe I'll just buy something completely different. So that's a lot of people's reaction, I think. But the way they approach it, they have to, because they have numbers they have to hit. Probably higher up in Cardone is, pressing them. So I can't, I can't speak for them, but I'm just have the same feedback you would have, is, get me out of here. How do I get away from this as fast as possible?
but what I like is that you managed to be one of the top sales guys by, and that reminded me a little bit of what Tim Ferriss said. He just kind of flipped the script, but instead of calling during business hours, he tried to call outside of business hours, and then there was no gatekeeper, and he would directly speak to the person that was in charge. And in a similar way, you were like, okay, if I get up at 2 or 3 a.m., I can directly get to those leads before anybody else is picking on them, and simply by doing that, you increase your sales funnel.
Yeah. Well, let me also, one thing. I was selling Toyota as one of the most recognizable brands in the world, most reliable. A lot of people had a Camry for 20 years, and they're coming to. I wasn't really selling anything. I mean, everyone already knows Toyota, so it's not like I wasn't selling some new brand just emerging. I don't know if I could have done that. I had a very easy product, I feel like, to sell. So if someone just like you mentioned, someone that's already owned a Camry for 20 years coming in to buy another one, you don't have to sell them on that. You just have to make the process easy for them to do so, right? You're not trying to sell them on the benefits of a Camry. They know better than you do. So a lot of car sales talk. I didn't see it going to car sales, but that's also an industry that a lot of people never, don't ever see the insides of. They're always curious, and they don't really know the inner workings of that industry. Just like yourself, you thought about it, something you said 8 years ago, but you still can probably remember it like it was yesterday, how you were treated, right? you never forget how someone made you feel, when you're treated poorly.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'll never go back to not only that car dealership, but probably that brand. Uh,
Not Toyota, right?
And it wasn't Toyota. I was just about to say
Okay.
that. Well, Andy, another question that I'd like to ask: what do you consider life well lived?
Yeah, life well lived. And if my fiance hears this, I mean, she'd probably say, "Well, you're not putting that into practice." But life well lived is to be able to have just the flexibility. And I'm not coming out here to say I'm not living my perfectly balanced life at this point. I've transitioned more towards that, but obviously still spending a lot of time working. There could be more time for the family. I think it's just it's you can get a sense when someone is living a well life. They don't have that urgency. They're more relaxed. They're kind of taking things as they come, and there's just not external stressors always on them, right? So I'm trying to set it up where I don't have external stressors in the form of bills to pay, deadlines, where it's just a more overall relaxed, your demeanor, you transition into a more relaxed person, and then you treat people better. So a life well lived would be having your basic needs met, having the time and the freedom to be able to spend with family, friends, travel, and kind of do more than just trade time for dollars working, just to, hit your paycheck, your basic needs, right? So it's a work in progress, but to me, that's what I'm after, and I'm getting there. But it's there's still obviously more time it takes, but hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. I like that, and I think we all be slightly better off if we keep external pressures in check, but also work on taking pressure internally. It's like it's a combination, a little bit like what you said earlier. It's like you can be on top of your spendings, and then your income doesn't need to be as high when, for example, whether it's an investment income or something. So kind of using both those screws to navigate how to feel good about the life you're living, and then you will naturally treat people better.
Correct. Yeah, I've just found it's kind of what I've encountered. I've like selling all those cars, dealing with. I mean, I was dealing with a lot of people. I'm selling 500 cars, and basically meeting 2 or 3 people per day, and they're all kind of different backstories. But I just noticed the most people that were the most calm or had other investments, vehicles, were always just, they were relaxed. They were never. There's always going to be that exception. The rich person that's an a-hole, and that's I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. But a lot of the most kind of wealthy, well-off people that were, they're buying Toyotas. They're not even flashy people. They're just really relaxed. They're not like an overrush. They're treating you with respect, even though they have a much higher net worth, or they're much higher place than necessarily you are. They're still treating everyone similar, right? And it's hard to put into words, but that's kind of what I'm after. I don't, if you know Maurice from LinkedIn. Yeah. Maurice, he's a big time poster. I was talking with him, and just talking with him, he's got that kind of relaxed vibe. Like he's made it. He's given back now. He's made it. But just talking with him, he's got that relaxed kind of like, he's comfortable, friendly, and that's kind of the vibe I'm going for.
Yeah, that's the kind of old guy we want to be, right?
Yeah. I hope we didn't hear you call him old, but he's not that old. But yeah.
No,
as we get older, yeah,
more senior than us.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are older and angry because life's throwing a lot of curveballs at them and challenges, and they've never gotten to a place where they're content, right? So they're angry and they're resentful of the youth, and they lash out, right? Versus the opposite. So that's kind of the whole basis, man. That's why I like the podcast title, because we're doing this all, like I never mentioned throughout this podcast, I never said I'm trying to make this much money doing mobile home parks. It's not about, it's definitely not even about the money. It's about having an enjoyable experience, and at the end of the day, providing for more freedom. Yes, I wanted to meet my basic needs and allow me to be comfortable, but I'm not chasing a monetary number. If that was the case, I would have stayed at the dealership.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's living a fulfilled life, where you feel good and you treat people the right way. That's kind of where it boils down to it.
That's what I'm going for, man. I love talking about it. So hopefully we didn't get too long-winded. It looks like we're still under, we're on time, maybe a little over.
We're on time. Well, Andy, thank you so much for making the time in the first place. I know you have a busy week. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I'm most on LinkedIn, just Andy Freeman on LinkedIn. Our website, which is being remodeled now, is just enjoycapitalgroup.com. Don't have anything available right now as far as offerings, but we will in the future. So enjoycapitalgroup.com or Andy Freeman on LinkedIn. Try to get on there as much as I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, making time in a busy week, and looking forward to a round 2 at some point, maybe.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.